the change he suffered in his personality is surely due to the fact that he feel like he was a trahison. Maybe he was how to say trahison? Betrayed. Yeah, he was betrayed by the editors and surely that he feel betrayed not only by the editor but also by his entourage, because as you say, he was really a popular guy. I think in these years, the black African writers, but he has, I think, in this period the same problem that with Kamara, because every author in this period was writing about the fight, colonialism, a lot of things. So the African writing was the fighting writing, and Kamara came with, we say, UBIZNEWS books about his life, about his life in childhood and so on. And one book came with a book in quotes, against the negritude, against the anti-colonialism, because people talk about slavery and pointing the African responsibilities in the 60s, where the African writer was trying to show to Europe that you have the responsibility in slavery. He came and said, no, you African, you have the responsibility. Maybe he was right too early, but he gave to the other a lot of reason to just throw him when he was in disgrace. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing is that he had a Renaudot. It was a Grand Prix de Renaudot, knowing that there were so many African writers writing books against Europe all the time. And he came with a book that feel like was against African, and he win a lot of prize. I think if Yambo was a writer today, with social network, it will be worse, because I think it will be insulted. It will be worse than in this time. But his reaction to that, this change of personality, that's something it's difficult to explain. Maybe it's someone who felt the betray so strong that he got almost crazy, if he's not crazy. It's just about that I wanted to react. It's something really brutal, this change of personality.
Yeah. Can I comment on that?
Yeah, but first you're going to do something in French. Ah ben, tu fais un résumé de ce que tu as dit, hein, c'est tout le monde. Because he's going to have to redo everything. He remembers. Because otherwise it will be hard.
Donc, in short, j'ai juste... le changement de personnalité de Yambo, c'était... on a l'impression que c'est vraiment dû à... il a ressenti comme une grande trahison, pas seulement de son éditeur, mais aussi de son environnement. Parce que c'était un dandy qui allait dans les soirées parisiennes, qui était accepté de partout, donc un Africain bien dans le ventre, dans ces années 60, 70. Et d'être rejeté comme ça par son milieu, je pense qu'il y a eu un changement brutal, ça a créé vraiment un brutal changement de personnalité. Et puis il ne faut pas oublier que dans ces périodes-là, il écrit quelque chose qui est contre la négritude, que les autres auteurs africains ressentent comme extrêmement contre le continent, parce que tout le monde dans ces périodes, beaucoup dans ces périodes écrivent contre le colonialisme, contre l'esclavage, ce sont des écritures de combat. Et lui, il vient avec une espèce d'écriture de contre-combat, où il pointe la responsabilité africaine de l'esclavage, alors qu'à ce moment-là, on parlait déjà pas beaucoup de la responsabilité européenne. Donc ça a été ressenti de manière très très négative par les auteurs africains, qui déjà avaient quelqu'un comme Kamara qu'on accusait d'écrire une littérature de bisounours, parce qu'il ne parlait que de son enfance, des beautés de l'Afrique. Lui, il vient avec une écriture qui est un peu contre les autres, donc il n'était pas accepté dans un milieu africain. il s'en fichait un peu puisqu'il avait son entourage. Et ensuite, il a été rejeté par, on va dire, le milieu littéraire européen avec cette histoire de plagiat. Et ça, ce changement brutal de personnalité, ça a dû être très très violent ce qu'il a ressenti comme trahison de la part de son environnement pour changer autant.
Merci.
Okay, thank you. I think I appreciate what you're saying. I think the question of, to understand where Yambo Ouologuem was coming from, you have to locate his work in the very particular context of his own ethnic group, his own village. Yambo Ouologuem was born in Bandiagara. This was the same village of Amadou Apateba, of Tiano Bukurtal, of El Hajj Segutal. This was the capital of the Tukulër Tijaniya Empire, where Agi Butal was installed by the French to rule. And so the chieftains in this part of Mali were largely Pulaar, so they were of a different ethnic group than Yambo Ouologuem. So he was Dogon, but he was also a member of the Tijaniya, who were largely Tukulër, Pulaar. And so he was a witness to a history that was extraordinarily complex. The jihad of El Hajj Omar Tall in the 19th century devastated Mali. It was a very brutal, awful event in which many people were killed, enslaved, and then the sectarian conflict between El Hajj Omar Tall and Amadou, the grandson of Sekou Amadou of the Messina Fulani, led to a situation where the entire region, a region that had never been colonized, was completely weakened, and that then allowed the French to come in and just take control of Mali very easily. And so he was, in some sense, a child of a history of violence. And so when he would read about Leopold Sédar Senghor speaking of his romantic childhood in Djilor in Senegal, I think it really struck a very false note for him, because that wasn't his experience. What I think is too seldom recognized is that the Devoir de Violence, like one says, oh, Yambo Ouologuem was an apologist for French imperialism, but Yambo Ouologuem was not even that focused on French imperialism. Yambo Ouologuem did not like the French. He was very anti-imperialistic, especially anti-European imperialism, which he thought was a terrible fraud, that was a violent, awful thing. And when I met him, he was very vigilant about wanting to document the history of French imperialism, where so many terrible things had happened. But he was also very much aware, and even more of a critic, of the history of Arab imperialism in this part of Mali, of what I would call Arabization ideology. And in Le Devoir de Violence, he speaks of the saïfs. This is a shortened word for sharifs. It's chérifienne ideology, the claims of those who make claims of election on the basis of their blood lineage, their claims to having some kind of mystical connection to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. And he saw how it wasn't a question of color, whether you were black, whether you were Arab, whatever you were, how those kinds of claims were used to justify enslavement, to justify violence against the poorest of the poor, who we call the Negreo, which I translate in English as the black rabble. And he came from a Dogon family, so he had no claim to any sort of blood lineage to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. He was very critical of all those who made those kinds of claims. And so I just find it very interesting that it's overlooked time and again. Well, in France, the French are narcissistic, let's face it. The French always like to talk about the French. The French love France, and they like all conversations to be about France. But a lot of what Yambo was addressing had nothing really to do with France. It had to do with the history of Arab imperialism, Arab slavery, Arab violence. And so if you look at what happened in 2012 in Gao and Timbuktu and what's happening right now in central Mali, where you have violence with Dogons, or Dogon are attacking Pular. When I met Yambo 10 or 20 years ago, it was unthinkable that that could happen. So we're seeing a repetition of this history, and I think that Yambo's book really comments on that very specific history. But because nobody knows that history or even cares about it outside of France, because all France wants to talk about is France, then what he was really focused on gets totally ignored. And so I think that the claim that Le Devoir de Violence was an apology for French imperialism, it's a very, very superficial reading of the novel, and it's one that I don't think is fair to Yambo. And so like when he retreated in the way that he did, I think he did so in part because in frustration out of a feeling that no one is ever going to understand what I'm talking about, and no one really cares. And so he said the whole thing was a failed quest, and so he gave it up and walked away. But if you read Le Devoir de Violence today, it remains an amazing novel, and I think it's, again, as I said previously, I think it's a prophetic novel in terms of what it's commenting upon and what's happening today in Mali right now.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can say that in French. Ok. Je vais essayer de dire la même chose en français. Bon, il y a beaucoup de critiques de Yambo Ouologuem qui disent qu'il était un apologiste pour le français. Que sa roman, quand il a attaqué Léopold Sédar Senghor, quand il a attaqué Négritude, c'était pour, absolver les Français. Mais Yambo, il n'aime pas du tout les Français. Et il était très très focus sur le sujet des crimes que les Français ont fait en Mali et en Afrique. Donc Yambo était un très très fierce, très très forte critique de l'impérialisme français. Mais son sujet n'était pas du tout... Yambo n'était... Il y avait des autres luttes pour Yambo. Et il n'était pas... il dit souvent qu'il y a trois histoires d'impérialisme, d'esclavage en Mali. D'abord, il y avait des Noirs qui ont cru qu'il était noble, et parce que ce n'était pas une question de couleur, mais le sang élu. Si on a le sang élu, on peut faire des esclaves, on peut tuer tout ce qu'on veut, parce qu'on croit qu'on était le descendant du prophète Mohammed. Même les Noirs, même les Arabes, les Touaregs, les Berbères, c'était pas une question de couleur. Et puis, il y avait l'histoire de l'impérialisme arabe. Et les Arabes ont fait beaucoup de choses terribles à Mali. Et Yambo, il était un homme Dogon, il était un homme noir. Il n'était pas pour les Poulards, dit qu'ils sont les Noirs arabes. Et les Poulards étaient les chefs à Bandiagara. Mais Yambo Ouologuem, il était Tijani, mais il n'était pas Poulard. Il ne dit pas qu'il a le sang de le prophète Mohammed. Il était une critique de tous les gens qui disent comment on dit, l'idéologie chérifienne. Il était un critique de ça. Bon, dans le devoir de violence, il utilise le mot saïf, mais le mot saïf, c'est-à-dire le mot sharif. Et les sharifs ils sont là maintenant. Il y a Galé de Assadine, il dit la même chose. Il dit qu'il est un sharif. Et à cause de ça, il peut détruire les tombes de Timbuktu. Il peut brûler les livres de Timbuktu parce qu'il il est un homme élu. Et c'était cette mentalité qu'il a attaquée. Et c'était cette histoire qui était importante à lui, mais c'est difficile de comprendre parce que en France, la France veut toujours parler sur le sujet de la France. Et bon, moi j'aime Paris beaucoup, j'aime la France, c'est un pays très très bel, mais il y a des autres sujets que la France. Et Yambo n'était pas s'intéresse sur le sujet de France uniquement. Il y avait des autres histoires pour lui.
Merci.
But the thing is about plagiarism and so on. I know you do not trust the things of plagiarism, I do, but I do think it was plagiarism. But that doesn't mean that the book is not a great book. People have to read that, it's a great book. But the thing is, which is troubling, that before the scandal came out, the book lived for, I think, 2 years. About 2 years, before being translated in English. So, the author was saying that the editor forgot to put the comma. Yeah, that the book was out for 2 years. And you have 2 years to notice that there was a comma missing in your book. Anyway, and for once, it was not from France the scandal started. The guy who pushed song was from Britain. So the American, because they do not mess with their copyright. The American, Schwarzbart was French, say, okay, it's a no-no for me. It took my work, but it's a no-no. It just passed by. But the American people, they should legal justice. My problem with the Yambo story in general, every scandal of plagiarism in France, people always say is editor fault or is someone else's fault. We have a lot of, in African literature in French, we have some case like that. It's never the author fault. I think we should not focus on that because it's plagiarism. In literature, plagiarism is a copy-paste. It's not just I have done something a little bit similar. It's a copy-paste. My point is that with the plagiarism, people forgot to read a good book, a great book. We just put the book. Now it got republished. It's good things. But by defending, instead of defending the books, since it was republished, I have seen a lot of people talking about a lot of articles. They do not defend the books. They are trying to defend the authors and to say there was nothing to see, just password. And for me, it's not a good thing. We should defend the book as a great book, as we were explaining, because we learn a lot of things there from the past and from today. But to defend the author and the act, I don't know if it was the author or if it was the editor, just things. We know that in this time, maybe it was not the case, but in this time, even Kamaralai, there were people say that about him. The editor in French was doing a lot of rewriting. When they got to the first manuscript, they will consider that for our audience, we will adapt. Many authors complain about that. Many books was really greatly changed by the editors. So we know that for many of our classics was really changed by the editors. But really, it's not important now. We don't care. It's a great book. The people people should focus on defending the book, on explaining. I told you that's one of the rare times where I have someone who are talking about what is inside the book. We talk about the chérifienne. Most of the time, people spend 1 hour, 2 hours defending Ouologuem, discharging him. In my view, is a wrong way to go. Donc, je revenais sur l'histoire du plagiat. Pour faire court, la sensation que j'ai, c'est que les gens défendent, depuis qu'il a été republié notamment, le Devoir de Valence, on défend, au lieu d'insister sur la qualité littéraire de ce livre, de parler du livre, de dire ce que le livre nous apprend, ce qu'il défend, les gens passent beaucoup de temps à défendre l'auteur par rapport à la question du plagiat, sur laquelle moi j'y crois, parce qu'on a beaucoup de cas dans la littérature africaine francophone, il y a quelques cas, mais en littérature française, il y a des cas où c'est toujours la faute de l'éditeur, c'est toujours la faute de quelqu'un, c'est jamais la faute de l'auteur, personne ne se dit jamais responsable, mais à la limite, on s'en fiche un peu, on s'en moque un peu. L'intérêt, c'est que quand ça nous produit un grand livre, il faut se focaliser à défendre ce livre, à parler de ce livre aux gens, et non pas vouloir à tout prix décharger l'auteur de sa responsabilité, qu'elle soit directe, que ce soit lui-même qui ait fait des emprunts, parce qu'un plagiat littéraire, très souvent, c'est difficile à prouver, sauf si c'est du copier-coller de ce qui a été fait. Au lieu de passer le temps à vouloir décharger l'auteur, ou ça peut être l'éditeur, parce qu'on a dans notre histoire littéraire, il y a beaucoup de livres qui ont été quasiment réécrits par les éditeurs, qui ont adapté les manuscrits qu'ils recevaient de certains auteurs pour que ça s'adapte mieux à la vue occidentale, à l'esprit européen. Donc il y a des livres, en tout cas, on a des rumeurs, on a des histoires que certains livres ont été largement réécrits par des éditeurs. Donc, peut-être que c'est ce qui est arrivé à ce livre, Le Devoir des violences, peut-être pas, mais à la limite, surtout avec le temps qui est passé, je trouve qu'on passe beaucoup trop de temps à parler du Ouologuem, de son histoire, de ce que les gens lui auraient fait, plutôt que de défendre le devoir de violence ou les 1001 Bibles du sexe, de parler de ces livres-là et du fait que tellement ils étaient en avance sur son temps. On devrait se focaliser sur ce genre de choses, parler du livre d'abord, parler de l'art et arrêter un peu de parler de l'artiste. C'est un peu ma position en général.
Merci. Autre chose? Do you want to say something? Or are you okay?
Maybe one more.
I agree that it's a much better use of our time talking about the Devoir de Violence and the history that it comments upon than these endless debates about how the text was produced. There are, however, scholars right now who are working very diligently on the question of researching how this text came to be produced. I was recently at a conference in Lausanne, Switzerland, and I heard many interesting papers where people now have access to the archives that they didn't have. So I think we're going to know more about this history in the days to come. But I also I find it, one of the reasons why I find it not even a topic that I don't really like to engage in too much is, for instance, in the United States, I teach American literature. I teach T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Witness Burroughs, his cut-up novels. The technique, if you read The Wasteland, nobody accuses T.S. Eliot of plagiarism because he drops quotes by Baudelaire and Dante into the text of The Wasteland. But with Yambo Ouologuem, he's been subject to this intense scrutiny, and this scrutiny really detracts from the very important questions that this novel raises. And again, I would say, as a point of reference, what's happening in Mali today, that if you carefully read Le Devoir de Violence, it offers a lot of insight into what has happened in Mali, and a kind of a blueprint for understanding how to to get out of that mess. Because in fact, the novel really, particularly the latter part of it, is really a kind of a meditation on the subject of the birth of the Republic. And I think, for instance, Yambo's attack on negritude is linked to his idea that this utopian idea that a state of nature, like Leopold Sédar describes in his childhood in Devoir, is a kind of an unhelpful fantasy. The concept of liberty that he meditates upon in Le Devoir de Violence. And we have to remember Yambo was also a student of philosophy, who read Kant, who read Rousseau, who read Hobbes. And so the state of nature, this idea that the state of nature would be an Eden-like state where everything is wonderful, and you're like Leopold Sédar with his fish and his birds and everything is nice, is essentially a kind of an unhelpful myth. Liberty, as it's classically defined, say as someone like Kant defines it, means freedom, but it means freedom within the law, and law implies the application of violence. As Kant's going to say, there's no such thing as a law that's not backed up with force. And so when originally the novel was entitled, it's Le Devoir de Violence. When it was translated into English the first time, it was translated as Bound to Violence. When I retranslated it a number of years ago for Africa World Press, I changed the title to The Duty of Violence, because what I think what that really comments upon, that what the title really refers to is this idea is that it is in effect a duty to apply violence, but because there's no such thing as a culture or society without laws that are enforced, but one must not enforce them without compassion. One must not enforce them to the point of excess. And so what Yambo Ouologuem, I think, saw in the history of Mali was a history where violence was applied without compassion, without mercy. And so he's saying, look, you have to have laws. The laws have to be enforced. Exercising violence is in effect a duty in any republic, but we can be more humane in our application of the law. So, for instance, at the end of the novel, when the Saif throws the serpent into the fire, he's in effect giving up. I think Yambo was urging his readers to become full players in the game that the new Republic of Mali would become. And what we've seen today is a collapse of the Republic of Mali. Mali now is a very fragile republic that's trying to come back to be strong. And I think Yambo's novel comments upon that. And those are the issues that I find to be urgent and important and relevant. And so I feel, this is why I feel whenever this question of plagiarism comes up again, it's like a car that's stuck in the mud. The wheel spins, but it goes nowhere. I think it's time, in my opinion, to just let this whole subject go. And as you suggest, focus on what the novel really has to say, because it has a lot to say.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Je suis d'accord que c'est pas une bonne idée de réfléchir, de parler, de discuter souvent le sujet de plagiarisme de ce roman, parce que le roman, les écritures de Yambo Ouologuem sont très riches et ils ont beaucoup de choses à dire sur l'histoire maintenant. Et je crois aussi que si on réfléchit souvent et sans relâche sur le sujet de le plagiarisme, on risque d'oublier ce qui est très très important, ce qui est vraiment important. Et ce qui est important, c'est ce qui se passe maintenant en Mali. L'histoire de Mali, c'est une histoire maintenant, c'est une histoire très très triste. Et quand le roman était publié, c'était l'instant, le moment de la naissance de la République, les républiques de Mali. Et Yambo, quand il a lu les écritures de Léopold Sédar Senghor, et quand Senghor, quand il chante sur toutes les bonnes choses de son naissance, de Gilor, les singes, les oiseaux, les poissons, il était un homme qui a étudié les philosophies. Il a lu Rousseau, il a lu Hobbes, il a lu Kant, et comme Kant a dit, l'état de nature, c'est un mythe. Il n'y a pas le jardin où tout est bon, et il n'y a pas de problème. Bon, la liberté est apposée de cette idée parce que on quitte l'état de nature, d'entrer en contact social, et quand on fait ça, on dit qu'il y aura des lois, et quand il y a de lois, la loi doit être enforcée. Comme Kant a dit, il n'y a pas une loi qui n'est pas enforcée. Une loi sans violence n'est pas une loi. Il y a toujours la violence. Donc, Yambo, il a regardé l'histoire de Mali, il a vu que c'est une histoire avec beaucoup de violence, mais il a connu, il a su qu'il faut appliquer la violence, mais il faut appliquer la violence avec compassion, il faut appliquer la violence dans une façon avec humanité. Il faut que la violence ne soit pas trop forte. Donc, le devoir de violence, on ne peut pas échapper le devoir de violence. Il faut exécuter la loi, mais on peut le faire avec compassion. Et au fin de le devoir de violence, à mon avis, c'est un roman avec optimisme, parce que Yambo a rêvé d'une bonne histoire pour Mali. Et maintenant, quand on regarde ce qui se passait, c'est un peu triste, mais c'est toujours possible d'avoir une forte république en Mali. Et à mon avis, c'est ce que Yambo, c'est ce qu'il a voulu. Il était un homme très concernant pour les pauvres, les victimes d'histoire, comme il a dit, les nègres, le black rabble. Bon, c'est un roman avec compassion et c'est un roman prophétique. Et j'espère qu'on continuera de le lire pour ces raisons, pas pour le sujet de s'il a cité Grandin ou les autres.